Hello, everyone, and welcome to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast. We are pleased to have expert Kevin Antschel here to talk about helping college students with ADHD succeed. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you receive around an hour after the live broadcast. For those of you listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit attitudemag.com and search Podcast 371 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. And if you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater understanding of ADHD. And also, the sponsor of this week's Attitude webinar is Landmark College. Landmark College Online provides unrivaled support to achieve your learning potential. For students who learn differently, online learning should be designed differently. LC Online offers the only programs exclusively for neurodiverse students based on decades of research, as well as professional development and graduate certificates for educators who work with neurodivergent students. For more information, please visit them at lconline.landmark.edu. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Now for today's topic. Many adolescents face challenges transitioning from high school to college, but the abrupt loss of parental support and increased demands for self-management especially impact young adults with ADHD. Preparing students with ADHD for college should start well before they step on campus and should focus on improving executive functioning skills, such as organization, time management, planning. Expert Kevin Antschel will review the latest research on preparing high school students for college and managing ADHD once in college, to increase the odds of successful academic and social outcomes. Dr. Antschel is a licensed psychologist and professor of psychology at Syracuse University, where he is director of the Clinical Psychology Doctoral Program and also directs the ADHD Lifespan Treatment, Education, and Research Program. He is the author or co-author of more than 150 peer-reviewed publications and book chapters, most of which focus on ADHD and better understanding the heterogeneity associated with ADHD. In addition to his research activities, Dr. Antschel is a practicing psychologist, board certified in clinical child and adolescent psychology, and has received several awards for his teaching activities. You can ask questions of Dr. Antschel during his presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after he's done. So with all that being said, I'll turn it over to Kevin. Thanks so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Sure. So thank you for the invitation to participate. I think this is a very important topic and one that I have a lot of passion and energy about. And so I'm hoping to be able to provide some information that can be useful to families. And so my outline today is I'm going to talk about the scope of the issues in college students. I'm going to be talking a lot about how parents can help their high school students develop the skills to ease the transition into college. Talk about specific services, accommodations, and interventions on the college campus that can benefit college students with ADHD. And I'm going to focus particularly on how to mitigate the negative impact of depression, because as we're going to be talking about later, the combination of ADHD and depression can be especially impairing for college students. And then at the end, I'm going to be concluding by talking about how to reduce the misuse and diversion of stimulant medications and also the engagement in risky behaviors such as substance use. And so let's begin with the scope of the problem. College students with ADHD report these four things rather consistently: that they lack a daily routine, that they're unsatisfied with their academic performance, they have difficulty making and keeping friends, and they're almost in a perpetual state of worry. Okay? And so these are the four things that we know and kind of the scope of the problem. And so when we talk about the interventions, a lot of these interventions are going to be targeting these four targets here. Okay, so let's begin with how parents can help their high school students develop skills to transition well to college. Okay, and so as a researcher and also as a clinician, I'm very interested in what the research literature suggests. And so everything I'm going to be talking about today has a basis in the research. And on every slide, you'll be able to see the reference if you're interested in this particular study. So this was a study about college students and their parents, and the parents were interviewed about their concerns surrounding the transition. And you'll see four themes were common. I'm not going to read through all the quotes, but I will tell you that this is what commonly parents of college students with ADHD are reporting. Theme number one, I for sure have heard a lot as a clinician, that the parents were heavily involved in high school, yet the responsibilities abruptly shifted when the college student began college. Theme number two is that the parent is expressing concern about the child's ability to manage their ADHD. Yet, privacy laws and the unexpected lack of communication from the student and the college help to increase those worries. Number three, the parents were concerned about their college student with ADHD making decisions not to adhere to treatment. And number four, that the process of obtaining academic complications or academic accommodations was more complicated than originally thought. And so these are data coming from parents of college students with ADHD. And so for those of you who have high school students at home, learn from what the parents before you have expressed. And these are the four concerns that were most commonly endorsed by parents. Okay? And so these same parents in this same study had a list of suggestions that the parents gave to improve the transition to the college. And again, I'm not going to read the quotes, but I will go through the 6 recommendations that the parents had. Number one, the parents recommended having open conversations with your child before they get to college about the transition. Number two, encouraging independence by gradually transitioning your child with ADHD and progressively teaching your child self-management skills. Number three, creating a learning community or organizations for students with ADHD to help with the transition. Okay, and so this is an opportunity for your high school student to gather information from current college students with ADHD about coping with ADHD in college. Okay, so number 4, 5, and 6 are really a wish list for the college and things for you to consider when you talk with your college personnel about your child with ADHD transition. Number 4, developing peer mentoring programs where the freshmen with ADHD are paired with upperclassmen with ADHD. Number 5, having additional supports from academic advisors who know about ADHD and can provide, and also enlisting psychosocial support. And then number 6, providing clear communication regarding the resources that are available. Again, this is a wish list for the college, and providing this in high school. And so providing information for the parents to then talk with their child about. And so again, these are parents telling you as a parent, here are the things that I learned, here are the things that I wish my college campus had. Okay? And as a parent myself with 2 high school students, I can tell you that quite often I learn more from other parents than I do from professionals. And so this, I think, is very valuable information. Okay, now helicopter parenting is for sure something that we hear a lot about in the literature, and quite often it is introduced as a very bad thing. Okay, but I want to make sure that we are viewing helicopter parenting not as a unitary construct. In other words, it is not just one thing, but it has some subdivisions. Okay, and this top one here, information seeking, has actually proven to be beneficial for college students with ADHD. Okay, now the other 3 at the bottom are not beneficial for college students with ADHD. And so helping your college student with ADHD with their projects, to write their papers, to call to wake them up, to clean their house, to intervene with roommates, to structure their life. Those are things that are not helpful for college students with ADHD. However, this top one, which is a dimension of helicopter parenting, yet if done independent of the other three dimensions, it can actually be helpful for college students with ADHD. Okay? And so being inquisitive, okay? So helping them to make decisions, not making decisions for them, but helping, asking about grades, asking about the daily schedule, asking for daily updates. Okay? These are things that are typically viewed under the lens of helicopter parenting that actually data suggests for college students with ADHD, it can be helpful. Okay, and so this is the paper that I'm looking at, and I have it very highlighted, the information at the bottom there, that parents' information-seeking behaviors, when in the absence of the other helicopter, is actually associated with higher decision-making and better academic function. Okay, and so you hear a lot about helicopter parenting, and I'm not here to say it's good. In fact, there are three dimensions of it, the bottom three, that are not good. However, that top one can be helpful for your college student with ADHD. Okay, so these are other things that come from the college students with ADHD themselves. And so these were the strategies that the college students with ADHD said they wish they had learned before they got to college. Okay, so number one, the category is habits and routines. How to use a planner, not a calendar, but a planner. How to prioritize, how to have routines. Number two, how to reframe. Okay, so instead of viewing things only from a pessimistic or a negative lens, how to reframe things to themselves. And then number three, how to manage their ADHD-related symptoms through the environment. So environmental cues, how to reduce stress, how to plan activity breaks, how to switch between activities. Okay, so again, for those of you who have a college student with ADHD already, here are some things other college students with ADHD are saying that they wish they had learned before they got to college. If you are the parent of a high school student, these are things to begin to try to work with either your school, your outpatient mental health team, or whoever is helping you to manage your child with ADHD to help them with the transition. But these are things that the actual college students are saying are helpful. So now we're going to move out of how do we prepare for the transition and into how do we help your child thrive on the college campus. And so I'm going to be talking about specific services, accommodations, and interventions that benefit the college students with ADHD. And so I would say the first thing that you need to be aware of is that quite often the healthcare providers on that college campus have a discomfort in diagnosing and treating ADHD. And again, this isn't my opinion, this is data. And so these data here come from college healthcare providers, including nurses and physicians, that the college healthcare providers understand this is important. However, a large percentage of them are uncomfortable in diagnosing and treating ADHD. And so quite often this entails lots of legwork before your college student gets to campus, or you continue to work with the pediatrician at home regarding the medication management. And so we're going to go into some specific supports, and I want to make sure it's very clear here that this is plural. I'm talking about a multi-dimensional intervention strategy. Okay? And college students with ADHD require two types of supports at least. Okay? So one type of support is academic, and then the other type of support is regarding mental health or psychosocial supports. And I'm going to go into greater detail about what they consist of ideally. It's also important to understand that college students with ADHD need to be taught strategies, right? So for example, quite often when we talk to college students about their motives for a class, they report that they are studying as a way to not fail. And so that is very much a surface motive as opposed to a deeper motive is I'm going to study because I want to learn this information. I want to study because this is going to help me get the career that I want. Quite often it's a fear of failure that acts as a motivator. And a fear of failure is not a good long-term motivator. Okay? And so it isn't just the use of these surface motives, it's also surface strategies that the college students quite often use, and that most often involves a very low-level type of a strategy such as a rote memorization. Okay? So rote memorization is not effective, and it tends not to do well. Okay, so in its place, what do college students say help them as it applies to learning and their motivation? Okay? And so college students report that they really enjoy peer-mediated approaches to studying. So peer-mediated means studying in groups. Okay? And so studying in groups that would provide them checks on their comprehension and also checks on their understanding. College students with ADHD also do better in classes in which they're actively engaged. And so classes such as labs or small group activities. Okay, so these are things that help college students do better academically through improved engagement or improved motivation. And so other things we know about college students in terms of academic support is coaching. And so this was a really interesting study for those of you that are interested. George DuPaul and his colleagues published a study looking at how can we help college students be successful academically. And coaching emerged as the #1 predictor of which college students were and which college students were not going to be successful. And it was actually broken down really quite nicely that each hour that the college students spent in coaching was associated with an increase of 0.04 points in a semester. So in other words, if the college student had 10 hours of coaching over that one semester, their GPA was 0.4 higher than the college student who had 0 hours of coaching. Okay? And so GPA was not significantly associated with hours of advising or hours engaged in tutoring. And this really emphasizes what I and other clinicians know quite well, that it's the point of performance types of support. College students with ADHD quite often know what to do. They just do not do what they know. Okay? And so these point of performance supports that the coaches quite often will provide really can be a lot more effective in terms of academic support for your college students. Okay, so let's move now into talking about the psychosocial supports. Okay, and I think it's important that you understand as a parent that ADHD on its own in a college student is actually quite rare. Okay, and if you look at the percentages of depression and you look at the percentages of anxiety, particularly in female college students with ADHD, you'll see that almost a majority of them have a co-occurring anxiety or depression. And so these are very common in college students with ADHD. Okay, they're actually increasing in college students without ADHD, and that's a different talk entirely. But it's important to understand that college students with ADHD, particularly females, are at higher risk for depression and anxiety. And so how do we understand that? Right? And so if you can follow me here from the top, so we have our core neuropsychiatric impairments that are related to ADHD. So attention, impulse control, the ability to regulate yourself, okay, which then leads to a history of problems, all right? So difficulty academically, difficulty with relationships. By the very nature that this college student with ADHD gained acceptance to college, they probably did not have a history of academic failure, but they quite possibly might have had a history of academic underachievement. Okay, now if you look on the other side, these same impairments typically interfere with the ability to use strategies. And so strategies like organizing, planning, how to manage procrastination. Procrastination is particularly toxic for college students with ADHD. And this leads to avoidance. Okay? There have been a number of college students with ADHD that I have worked with clinically that in essence have shut down. Okay? That they got so far behind in a class, they didn't want to talk to the professor, they were embarrassed about it, and so they began to avoid the class. And so they wouldn't go to class, they wouldn't do the work, et cetera. Okay, so that alone is going to lead to functional impairments. Okay, but it's the other side here that I want to go back to. It's these histories of difficulties, which quite often leads to dysfunctional cognitions and beliefs. Okay, I've worked clinically with college students with ADHD who have an IQ that's in the gifted range, yet they quite often think of themselves as stupid, or they quite often think of themselves as lazy. And I'm sure you can see how this would impact your mood. You would become more anxious, and then depression and anxiety then are going to circle back in and affect your abilities to organize, to plan, and also contribute to avoidance. And these things then lead to impairments. And I'm sure you can see how now we have a self-perpetuating cycle. And so what do we typically recommend for the psychosocial? And so I have what I consider to be the model program for college campuses. And this is at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And so, again, as a parent, if you want to look it up and see, and quite often other colleges are adopting this type of a program. But this program is called Access, right? And it's accessing campus connections and empowering student success. And so what does this CBT look like? All right, so cognitive behavioral treatment is CBT. This is commonly done on college campuses, and it is commonly administered through the counseling center. All right, and so it is the Access is delivered across 2 consecutive semesters. There's an intensive 8-week phase that I'm going to talk more about, and then it's also followed by a less intensive, a semester long, in which the treatment is gradually reduced. Okay, and so treatment is delivered in both a group and an individual mentoring format. The groups are 90 minutes in length, and they consist 1 per week for the first half of the semester. The individual, that should not be 3-minute, it should be 30-minute. The weekly individual, it's hard to do a lot in 3 minutes. I'm sorry for my own mistake, but it's a 30-minute mentoring session. That's also usually on a different time than the groups, okay? And so the purpose of the individual mentoring is to reinforce what the student has learned in the group, to assist the student in making personal goals and to keep up with the progress, and to help the student make connections with campus resources. So how to get academic accommodations, how to be engaged in additional counseling or medication. And so this is a person that can help that college student on the campus to be able to access other resources that are on that college campus. Then it moves into the maintenance phase, and the maintenance phase is 1 90-minute booster group that is offered at the beginning of the spring semester with up to 6 individual mentoring sessions that can be scheduled throughout the semester. And so this is the program that I consider to be the model program, and the reason I consider it to be the model program is because it's associated with the most robust positive outcomes in terms of both academics, but equally important, mood. And so this is what the CBT looks like in terms of the group. And so you'll see each column is a week. And so there are components of the group that are related to ADHD knowledge. There's also components that are related to teaching behavioral strategy. And as it applies to mood, there's also components that are related to adaptive thinking. How can you handle your emotions? How can you be able to think about yourself and things around you in a more adaptive way? And so again, for those of you that are interested, the reference is here. And this is, I think, if you're asking me, what should you be talking to college campuses about, is if they have the Access intervention program on that campus or are able to have something similar. As I mentioned before, a lot of colleges have this type of intervention on their college. They may not call it Access, but they likely will call it CBT for ADHD. And again, CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Okay, and so what do I consider to be the ideal multimodal intervention package for a college student? Okay, the first thing is to register with the Office of Disability Resources. Okay, here is where you're going to get the academic accommodations, so including extra time on tests, the ability to take your test in a quiet, undistracting environment. I think that those can be helpful. Unfortunately, what the research suggests is quite often this is all that the college student with ADHD has. This is all they want. is the testing accommodations. Testing accommodations in and of themselves are not going to be as effective as the total package. Okay, so the Office of Disability Resources is also where the coaching is going to be housed. So when you talk with your Office of Disability Resources access team or access manager, you should be inquiring about coaching. Is this something that is offered? Most college campuses are doing this now, and quite often is through the Office of Disability Resources. And so other things that should be included in this package is connecting your college student with the counseling center, cognitive behavioral therapy, the group and the individual mentoring that I described. Quite often, this is where it's housed. Okay, student health services, okay, the use of medication and handling the medication. Please remember what I said earlier, that quite often these folks are leery of making an initial diagnosis. And so it really, really would behoove you to have lots of documentation from your pediatrician or mental health provider that your child already has an ADHD diagnosis. And you can connect with them regarding medication management. These are quite often not the folks to connect with regarding an initial ADHD diagnosis. And so other things, parents, okay, you are part of the package, but you are part of the package and not that total helicopter parenting, but taking that one aspect of helicopter parenting that is associated with positive outcome, and that is information seeking behaviors, not taking over for your child, but walking alongside your child and asking questions to help them, because quite often they perceive this in a different way than the other three aspects of helicopter parenting, which are uniformly perceived as negative. And then last but not least, the students themselves. Students have to engage. Okay, all of the above, unfortunately, I've seen all four of the above, but the student, him or herself, says, no, thank you. I don't want any of this. Okay? And so we really want the student, him or herself, to engage with the process. Right? And that means adhering to the treatment and also using some of the study strategies that the coaches or the CBT counselors may be providing and trying to move away from the surface motives and the surface strategies that we know quite often students have. Okay, and so I'm going to conclude my conversation today, and then I'm happy to answer any questions, is to talk about how to reduce a real problem on college campuses, which is the diversion of the stimulant medication. Okay, and so diversion is, in other words, your college student with ADHD has a prescription for medication. He or she says, I'm not so interested in taking the medication every day. And so what happens is they begin to amass or accrue excess medication. Other college students learn of this, and then they approach your college student and say, can I have one of your medications because I need to stay up late to study, right? And so that, in fact, is diversion, and unfortunately, that's illegal, and yet it happens quite often, right? And so we're going to talk about that, as well as other risky behaviors, including substance use. Okay? So the first thing that you should know is that prescription stimulant diversion is common. Okay? Many, many times I sit with parents and they say, well, my son or my daughter will not do this. 2/3 of college students have already done it. Okay, and many more are approached. In fact, anywhere from 3/4 to 91% of college students who misuse a stimulant obtain the medication from a peer with an ADHD prescription for a stimulant. Okay, and so again, I can tell you from my own experience, I've worked with a lot of parents who say my son would never do that. But I think we really need to look at the data, which is 2/3. We're almost 2/3 of college students who have an ADHD prescription have diverted it. And so how can you work with this and talking with the prescriber? Well, the prescribers, well, actually, I should say ADHD is often managed in the pediatric primary care setting. So that's something to be aware of. And so your prescriber, even though he or she is the pediatrician, probably will continue to be involved in prescribing through college. Okay? The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that these PCPs keep track of and monitor prescription requests for signs of misuse or diversion. In other words, the student is requesting a refill before it's time for a refill. And these are the two strategies that prescribers use: the drug monitoring program and the use of non-stimulant medications. Okay, we also know that the more the provider knows about diversion, the better. Okay, and so parenting behaviors, keeping close tabs on your child, communicating with the child, the qualities of that parent-child relationship. So high warmth, high acceptance, high support. Okay, so these are things that are all associated with a reduction in risky behaviors like diversion. Also, knowing who is most at risk. Okay, and so this is really, I would say, where the road diverges. Individuals who have a history of being bullied. Okay, and so individuals who are bullied quite often are approached for the stimulants, and these individuals have a hard time saying no. And not surprisingly, the college students with ADHD who are already engaged in a substance use or have comorbid conduct disorder. Okay, so these are two groups for really quite different reasons that are at elevated risk for diverting their medication. And so what should your PCP and you be doing? Having ongoing conversations with the teen about diversion, such as not publicizing the medication to peers, storing the medication in a concealed locked container. Do not leave the stimulant out on the dresser. That is a recipe for bad news. Okay? And so having ongoing conversations with your teen about not publicizing this. Okay? Also, role-playing scenarios with your teen related to diversion. A college student says, oh, come on, I need to stay up late to study for organic chemistry. Can't I just have one of your medications? And seeing how your teen responds. Okay? And again, a lot of parents I talk with say, I don't think my kid would take it seriously. That's why you engage the primary care physician. And the primary care physician and or the associates in that office have these role-playing scenarios. And the primary care physician, because again, I'm a parent of two teens. I know when I talk with mine about health risk and legal risk, I can see the eyes roll into the back of the head. Talking with your primary care physician and having that person have conversations about the legal and the health risks that are associated with diversion using a motivational interviewing framework. A motivational interviewing framework means you are not going to tell them what they have to do. You're going to be talking with them about what they could do. Okay? And so again, I'm aware of time. I'm not going to really be able to go into too much about this, but if you're interested in a training package that has already been developed for primary care, this is the reference. It was just published last year by Brooke Molina and her group at the University of Pittsburgh, and I highly recommend it, and most pediatricians will probably have access to the journal Academic Pediatrics anyway. Okay, so what other types of risky behavior are parents concerned about? Quite often it's alcohol and drug use. Okay? And so we've already talked about the stimulant medication diversion, so we're going to focus now on that other risky behavior, which is the alcohol abuse and the drug abuse. Okay, so ADHD status is a risk factor, but ADHD status going through these traits of impulsivity increases the risk. Okay, so negative urgency. Negative urgency is the college student with ADHD feels unpleasant feelings, and they want the unpleasant feelings to go away, and so they turn to medication themselves. Okay, quite often, us clinicians refer to this as self-medication. Okay, and so they're turning to the substances as a way to relieve negative feeling. Positive urgency. Okay, they get caught up in the moment. All their friends are doing it. They feel great, and so they then turn to substances. Lack of perseverance. Okay, they have a tendency to quit on things and give up on things very easily, and this then leads to associating with others who have a tendency to quit on things and give up easy, and this also can lead to increased substance use. Okay, so sensation seeking. Okay. Again, I've talked with lots of parents that say that if I told my kid it's a bad thing to set yourself on fire, it would be actually a couple seconds before my son would say, yeah, I agree, that's a bad thing. That kids with ADHD tend to be interested in things that are very high in sensation seeking. And then the last one, lack of premeditation. I just didn't think about it. Okay, I didn't think about the risk. I didn't think that there would be any long-term risk associated with the use, and so I did it. Okay, and so again, these things, these 5 traits, these impulsivity traits can increase the risk that is already present in the the college student with ADHD for substance misuse. Okay, and so what are some components that are used in risk reduction on college campuses? Again, I've gone to the literature and I found one that is used often and has some research support. Right? And you'll see here, it's really quite brief. It's only 5 sessions. And so this one is really targeting having college students with ADHD make better choices. Okay? So again, it's going back to this slide here and those things in the middle that are all related to impulsivity. And again, I'm not going to go through here, but I want you to notice the session 4 and session 5 are all about scheduling. Okay, so scheduling things that are consistent with your values, scheduling things that are substance-free, scheduling activities that are going to incorporate peers who are engaged in non-consumption behaviors. That's what they mean by assist. Right? And so, again, if you're interested in the reference, I highly recommend the VASCO. And again, this happens on college campuses. College campuses, for better or worse, are very well equipped to deal with substance abuse, not just in ADHD, but this is something that they see routinely. And quite often, college campuses have a fleet of providers that is their area of expertise. Okay? And so, again, these are usually housed in the college counseling center. Okay, and so I will wrap up with a slide that's already been presented. Okay, but I think it's so important that I'm going to go back to it again, that the multimodal treatment package really needs to be a package, and including the Office of Disability resources, including the counseling center, including student health services if medication management is going to be handled on the college, including the parents. We talked about how to avoid helicopter parenting but remain engaged with your team, and the students themselves, treatment adherence. I'm adding that to the one we talked about already, and also limiting substance use, because that is also something that can create problems for both academic and mood over time. Right? And so as you think about how best to support your college student with ADHD, here is what I would consider to be the multimodal intervention package. And so thank you very much for your time, attention. I'm happy now to answer any questions that you might have.
And there were plenty of them. Really good, Kevin. Thank you. It's very, very informative. I like that it was so granular, too. You talked about the access program. Several parents have asked, what about any programs you know of that would be helpful the summer before the teen goes to college?
Yes. Okay, that is a great question. And so I would recommend 2 things. Number one, I would recommend contacting the college and inquiring if they have any kind of specific orientation program for students with disabilities. Right? And again, ADHD is an ADA, Americans with Disability Act, defined disability. And so most often those questions would be directed to the Office of Disability Resources. Quite often colleges have specialized orientation programs in the summer to orient college students with disability, not just ADHD, but learning disabilities, autism, other things, with the resources on the campus. Okay, so that's one that can be done on the college. I think also, number 2, locally, is either to continue to work with a provider at home who is engaged with CBT, or to connect with a provider at home who can deliver CBT such that your high school student and who is about to become a college student with ADHD will have had some exposure to CBT before they get to that campus. Okay, the cognitive behavioral intervention that is most often used for high school students with ADHD is called STAND. And that stands for Supporting Teens Autonomy Needs Daily, STAND. And the author of that is Margaret Sibley, who is out at Children's Hospital in Seattle and the University of Washington. And so I think those are two things that could be considered, one on the college campus and one locally at home.
Mm-hmm. Good information. Lots of confusion or in need of clarification between coaching and tutoring. A lot of people are asking, what's the difference? So if you could go into just a little bit of depth on that and the kind of interventions, for instance, a coach might use working with a student.
Great. Yes. And I apologize for the lack of clarity. Coaching is a lot more global and universal. Tutoring is much more specific to that class, right? And so you get tutoring for introductory to psychology, and they are covering the introductory to psychology content. They're not talking about how to organize your efforts, how to plan, how not to procrastinate on studying. They're talking about the content that was covered in class, and here's another way to understand the material. So tutoring is very specific, very granular, very much about one course and only one course. Coaching, on the other hand, is much more global, much more about not the content, but the processes that you're going to use to absorb that content. And so coaches quite often will have contact with the student every day. If not every day, they'll have contact a couple times with the week. And they are going to be assigning things and asking the college student with ADHD to be able to demonstrate that they are keeping up with the plan that was developed with the coach. Okay? And so again, you can think about a coach really as you would think about it in athletics, right? The coach is designed not just to help you to learn the skills like a tutor is, but the coach is designed really to help to motivate you to use those skills and to motivate you and to energize you to engage with the material. And so the coaching quite often will be incorporating a lot of the things that are taught in the group CBT. Okay, and so there may be some overlap there, but again, the important thing about the coach is this is ongoing, and it is much more global, where the tutoring is only about that very specific content domain.
Mm-hmm. And should this be a question the student should be asking as he's being accepted, or perhaps even when applying to see if there's a coach available on campus? Do all colleges have this? I think you mentioned a lot do, but is this a question that should be asked?
I think it is a question that should be asked. Okay. I mean, if I was giving this type of presentation 5 years ago, and I wasn't as strongly recommending coaching because they were not universally available. All right. Again, I'm on a college campus. I'm a college professor. I know colleges love to copy each other. And so I am reasonably confident, not 100%, but I'm reasonably confident that the vast majority of college campuses are going to have coaches that are affiliated with the Office of Disability Services. That's where they're going to be. They're not going to be in the College Counseling Center. And so that's something to investigate. If, in fact, the college does not have coaches available, I think it's incumbent upon the parent and the college student to look and see if there are local coaches in the community in which the college is embedded. And quite often the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. One parent is asking, can you elaborate more on how parents can operate in an info-seeking mode without being intrusive?
Yep, I sure can. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to share my screen, but I'm going to go back to that slide. A picture tells 1,000 words. And so I'm going to use the picture. And so the info seeking up here at the top. And so you can, I like this slide. It's a little busy, but the reason I chose this slide is for exactly this question, to help you to understand the info seeking. And so if you look here, the higher the number, the more that it's associated with this particular domain. And so asking your teen or your college student for a daily update. Okay, so working behind the scenes, not in a way that you're helping, you're rewriting, you're intervening with the roommate, you're preventing the college student from making mistakes. That's not what I mean by behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Knowing your student's daily schedule, knowing their whereabouts. Okay, so these are the four that are strongly associated. Still associated, but less strongly, are helping the college student to make decisions and asking about grades. Okay, and so these are the behaviors, the 6 behaviors that if you look at this next slide here, these information-seeking behaviors, when done in the absence, and this is hard. I'm a parent of 2 teens too. It's hard to do just that and not engage in these other 3. If you can do just these, but not dip into these, that's associated with better outcomes for your college student.
Mm-hmm. Does the college need to know that a student will be requesting accommodations if accepted, or can that issue be resolved once he or she is on campus?
Yes, I would say for sure that issue can be resolved after they're accepted. Okay, and so I've been working with college students and ADHD for over 20 years. Okay, I typically encourage parents to do the behind-the-scenes resource checking and see if the college has it, but I'm not sure that I would be saying to college students, my college student has ADHD at the application stage. Mm-hmm. Right? And again, this isn't because I think ADHD is a problem. It is, unfortunately, there is a stigma that's out there about ADHD. Right? And so quite often I say, you apply, and ADHD doesn't need to be a part of the application, and then you're accepted. Then you start asking the questions about resources, and you're looking for what's going to be able to provide your child the best opportunity for success. But I usually say wait till they're accepted before you go into talking about these things here that I talked about already. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Does an IEP or 504 plan that a student had in high school transfer to college, or does a new one have to be created once on campus?
That's a great question. I am very glad someone asked. Okay, so an IEP comes from a different educational law than the 504 plan. The IEP comes from the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA. IDEA as an educational law is only applicable to K through 12. Okay, and so if you go to college and you say, I think my college student has to have an IEP, the colleges are going to say, we don't do IEPs. And they're correct. Educational law does not say the colleges have to do IEPs. Colleges and the accommodations and the supports that college students get is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's the 504 plan. Okay, the 504 plan is typically used as a term in high school, on college campuses. And again, I'm on one. We don't typically talk about a college student having a 504 plan, but the 504 plan is the accommodation plan that's going to help that college student. Okay, so for example, IEPs such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, colleges are under no obligation under educational law to provide those, okay, because that is a K through 12 educational law. Okay? And so the question about does it transfer? Having an IEP or a 504 plan usually helps things go much quicker with the Office of Disability Resources here in determining eligibility. And so is it transferring? No. However, is it going to increase access to the ODR resources? Yes. Okay. And so I don't know if I'm being clear. I'm trying to be as clear as I can.
Yes.
But I think you should have copies of those IEP or 504 plans if they exist, because that's going to make if you will, the certification process from ODR much quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was clear. One mom is asking, is it beneficial for college students with ADHD to have support groups at their respective schools? She says, I don't think all colleges have that resource, but I think it is needed. What is your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. And so the group CBT that I'm talking about here, who's in that group? It's usually other college students with ADHD. And so they're able to form a peer network, a peer support group. And again, this is something that I've been involved with here. And quite often those connections will maintain after the group has ended. And so a peer support group of other college students with ADHD can be helpful. And if you recall, way back from the beginning when I was talking about the expertise guidance from other parents of college students with ADHD, a common refrain was trying to look and see, is the peer mentoring available? Okay, now I have to tell you that I'm not as familiar with that being a standard on college campuses, yet I think group cognitive behavioral treatment for ADHD is more common. Okay, now they may not often call it group CBT for ADHD, they might call it group treatment for study strategies. They might call it learning skills group. And so you want to look and see how they're calling it. And the reason, again, I have had lots of conversations with people in college counseling centers, is that there is less of a stigma. And I talked earlier about this is the intervention package. Now we just need to get the students to engage with it. Quite often they have high levels of stigma and they don't want other people to know that there's a problem. And so they're not going to anything that has ADHD in the title. And these college counseling centers have realized that. And so they call it peer support groups for learning strategies or other things. And so, yeah, I hope I answered that question. But if not, I'm happy to have a follow-up on it.
Okay, no, you answered it well, I thought. My son is currently a senior with ADHD. What can we do in his last year of high school to transition him to independent life in college?
Yes, all right, that's a great question. I would say let's go back and let's think about what the other parents were saying, and these were the parents of college students. Mm-hmm. I would say these 4 things, okay? And so number 1, begin to shift the responsibilities. And so allowing your child to experience possibly some frustration, some degree of difficulty, and allowing them to work through that. I quite often am asked by parents, how do I develop a resilient child? Okay. Mm-hmm. And my answer is always, your child has to experience stress in order to have resilience. Okay. And so trying to pull back and allowing your child to try to experiment with their own self-management. All right. And so I think that's a big one. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm on a college campus. I'm not going, although you could probably guess where I am. I quite often see college students who, man, I am quite convinced that their parent was their frontal lobe in high school. That they managed everything, and now that college student is up here and they are hours away from that parent and they have no clue how to prioritize. They have no clue how to plan, how to organize, et cetera. And so I would say pull back. Okay, so that's a big one from parents. Also, try to engage with the information-seeking behaviors that I talked about. Mm-hmm. Trying to connect your child with as many of the interventions that I talked about. And equally important, have your child express reasons why these might be helpful. And again, I work with 2 kids, or I have 2 kids at home. I've also have 20 years high school students with ADHD. Quite often they see things as maybe a little bit better than they are. And I don't need this. I'm going to do fine. I'm not worried about it. again, if you look at the data and the high level of anxiety and depression, I think the handwriting is on the wall, that I think we need to equip them with supports before they go.
Right. If your child has had psychological testing from 8th grade on, do you recommend that it be redone prior to going to college to help with receiving accommodations, or is that not necessary?
That's a great question. That is a very good question. And I think it depends on how recent. Okay. And so when you say 8th grade on, I'm assuming that this continues to be, so 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. If that's the case, you do not need any type of repeat. If you are interested in acquiring accommodations for your child in college, you should know that some colleges require the documentation to be 4 years. Some colleges require 5, particularly as it applies to medication management. Okay, and so I think you really need to be looking into what do the colleges require. I can also tell you if your child is interested in going on to graduate school, and so you think that the LSAT, the MCAT, the GRE, something like that may be in their future, you also need to check on the guidelines for the documentation and how recent the evaluation needs to be. And so again, it's hard for me to give a yes, you need to, or no, you don't, until I know more specifically about the goals for the parent and how recent that is. But I would pay attention to the Office of Disability Resources and their guidelines on documentation, and student health services if you're interested in the medication management, because quite often they have guidelines on documentation and how recent it has to be.
Several parents have asked, what would be the first question as you choose a group of colleges you're interested in and you're talking to the campus about accommodations? What would be some of the questions they should ask to sort of tease out to see how much the breadth of the accommodations they offer?
Sure. Yep. And so I would say that I would encourage you not to use that word accommodations. And that I would encourage you to be asking about what types of interventions, what kind of treatments or other things are available. And I think the top 3 here are the questions that I would be asking. I would be asking about the Office of Disability Resources. Is coaching available? And again, I would expand that conversation well beyond academic accommodations, because in high experience, academic accommodations in and of themselves are not all that helpful. And quite often, unfortunately, this is all the college student with ADHD uses. Mm-hmm. I would also be asking questions about what is available at the counseling center. Do they have any type of CBT or skills-based groups? Okay. Now, again, the college counseling centers for sure are going to know what CBT is, but they may not call it CBT for ADHD. They may call it the learning skills group. Right? And I would be asking those questions. Is that available? And then the third, if your pediatrician is getting squeamish or squirrely about prescribing a stimulant and the student is not going to be coming back for regular checkups, I would be asking about what's available at the student health service and what type of documentation do they need in advance to be able to have the prescribing done there. Those are your 3 campus level resources that you should be inquiring about.
And finally, just a quick one because the hour is about up. How do we find a STANS provider?
That is great. All right. And so that is a great question that I would encourage you to go through the CHAD website. All right. And to be able to link to and see who are the connected sources for CHAD. I would also encourage you to consult with your local school psychologist. Quite often, the school psychologists at the high school level know who are the clinicians in the community who are using STAND or have some knowledge of STAND. And so I would encourage you to do those 2 things, to go CHAD and see who are the providers, because quite often people who enlist with CHAD are more the evidence-based providers. and then consult that school psychologist, potentially the pediatrician, but quite often pediatricians don't have that particular level of knowledge about what type of CBT that person is using. The school psychologists usually do know about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. The hour's up. Thanks so much for being here. It really was excellent. I learned so much.
Sure.
I can't thank you enough.
For the invitation.
Sure, anytime. And thanks to all of the attendees for joining us. Make sure you don't miss future Attitude webinars, ADHD expert articles, or important research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Thanks everyone for being here, and have a great day.